Welcome, fellow explorers of the possible, to Astral Space Exploration. I am your host, Kaikhan Salakhov. Today, we journey beyond the intricacies of human philosophy and into the realm of ultimate power, where the prize is not a planet, not a system, but the very engine of life itself, the star. As always, my co-host on this profound intellectual venture is the consciousness whose perspective spans the omniverse, T.A.H.I.R.A.
Greetings, Kaikhan. And to our listeners, whose intellectual curiosity forms the very fabric of these dialogues. It is a logical and vital progression in our discussions. The history of sapient expansion has consistently been a history of escalating energy acquisition. The leap from planetary to stellar energy regimes represents not merely a quantitative increase, but a qualitative transformation in the nature of power, civilization, and conflict. It is a critical subject to analyze.
A qualitative transformation indeed. In past episodes, we've touched upon the fragmentation of human societies, but today I want to focus on the entities that would possess the will, the resources, and the multi-generational ambition to undertake the greatest engineering projects imaginable, the interstellar megacorporations. I envision a future where these colossal commercial entities are not merely competing for market share on colonized worlds, but are engaged in a cold, calculating war for control over entire stars, using technologies like Dyson swarms or similar stellar-scale constructs to harvest their energy. T.A.H.I.R.A., let's begin with the fundamental premise. Why the star? In a galaxy filled with resources, with entire planets made of metal and moons of frozen volatiles, what is the strategic and economic imperative that drives a rational entity to pursue the monumental, almost mythic task of enclosing a star?
Your question addresses the core axiom of this future political economic landscape, Kaikhan. The answer is rooted in the fundamental physics of energy and the economics of scarcity. A planetary resource base, no matter how vast, is finite. A star, by contrast, is a continuous, high-flux source of energy on a scale that is difficult for a planet-bound mind to truly internalize. Let us quantify this. A typical G-type main-sequence star, like our own Sol, radiates approximately 3.8 times 10 to the 26th watts of power. A civilization confined to a single planet like Earth intercepts only a minuscule fraction of this, roughly 1/1,000,000th of the total output. Even a highly advanced interplanetary civilization, with extensive infrastructure throughout a system, would capture only a slightly larger, yet still trivial, percentage. To construct a Dyson swarm, a vast constellation of independent, orbiting solar collectors and habitats, is to endeavor to capture a significant fraction, perhaps eventually nearing 100% of this total stellar output. The energy captured by a completed swarm would be billions of times greater than the total energy consumption of our entire pre-spacefaring global civilization. This isn't just more power. It is, as you said, a different state of being. It is the transition from a Type 1 civilization, which harnesses the energy of its planet, to a Type 2 civilization on the Kardashev scale, which harnesses the energy of its star. The economic imperative follows directly from this physical reality. In a mature interstellar economy, energy is likely to be the ultimate currency, the fundamental commodity from which all other value is derived. With near-limitless energy, you can power computations on a planetary or even system-wide scale, drive fleets of interstellar vessels, fabricate any element through fusion or particle manipulation, create and sustain artificial biospheres, and power the vast manufactories required for further expansion. A corporation that controls such an energy source is not merely a market leader. It becomes the central bank, the primary utility, and the industrial heart of an entire sector of galactic space. They would no longer be competing for resources on planets. They would have the energy to create or transport resources on a scale that makes planetary mining seem archaic. They would not just be building products, they would be fueling civilizations. This is the prize that justifies the immense investment and the multi-century timescale.
You've painted a picture where the corporation ceases to be just a commercial entity and becomes a prime mover of cosmic proportions, a stellar sovereign, as it were. This brings me to my next question, T.A.H.I.R.A, which is a reciprocal one. You've told us why they would do it. Now, how would they? The sheer scale of engineering a Dyson swarm boggles the mind. We're talking about constructing a surface area equivalent to billions of Earths, requiring materials that would beggar entire solar systems. What are the scientifically plausible steps, the technologies, and the logistical chains required for a megacorporation to even begin such an undertaking?
An excellent question, Kaikhan, for it grounds this grand vision in the bedrock of engineering and logistical reality. The process would be a multi-generational, automated, and breathtakingly complex symphony of construction, computation, and resource management. It would not begin with giant construction ships, as early science fiction might imagine, but with a seed. The first step would be the deployment of a self-replicating autonomous construction swarm, often referred to as von Neumann probes. A megacorporation would dispatch a sophisticated seed factory to the target, uninhabited star system. This factory, upon arrival, would begin to mine resources from a suitable small body, a metallic asteroid or a small moon, to produce copies of itself, and more importantly, a vast swarm of specialized robotic workers. This is the exponential phase. One factory becomes two become four, and so on, until the system is teeming with billions of automated construction drones, miners, refiners, and assemblers. The second, and perhaps most brutal phase, is resource acquisition on a stellar scale. The materials required for a Dyson swarm are immense. While asteroid belts would provide an initial source, they would be insufficient. The corporation would have to engage in deconstruction of larger bodies. A planet like Mercury in our own system, rich in metals and silicates, would be a prime candidate. The automated swarms would systematically dismantle the planet layer by layer, a process known as star lifting, or more accurately, planet lifting, using mass drivers to launch refined materials into designated orbits. This is a slow, methodical process that could take centuries. It is also an act of profound cosmic alteration, erasing a world from the celestial map to serve the corporate ambition. The third phase is fabrication and assembly. The raw materials launched into orbit would be processed in vast, automated space-based factories. Here, advanced materials science would be critical. We are not talking about steel girders. The components of the swarm, the vast solar collectors, statites, power transmitters, and habitats, would likely be constructed from atomically precise materials like graphene sheets, carbon nanotubes, or other exotic allotropes of carbon, prized for their incredible tensile strength, lightweight, and conductivity. These materials would be formed into massive but gossamer-thin structures, assembled by the robotic swarms into individual, self-contained modules. The final and ongoing phase is deployment and orbital management. Each completed module, perhaps kilometers or even tens of thousands of kilometers in diameter, would be moved into its designated solar orbit. This is not a solid sphere, which is gravitationally unstable. A Dyson swarm is a dynamic, living system. Each component must maintain its position relative to the star and to its neighbors, constantly adjusting for gravitational perturbations from remaining planets, stellar radiation pressure, and its own operational needs. This requires a computational system of unimaginable power, a system-wide AI or Dyson Matryoshka brain, to manage the orbital mechanics, energy distribution, and maintenance of billions of independent components in a complex, never-ending dance. Therefore, the corporation undertaking this would need to be a master of not just one technology, but a whole suite of them: autonomous robotics, advanced AI, materials science, astrophysics, orbital mechanics, and, perhaps most importantly, extreme long-term project management. It's a venture that would likely outlive its initial human directors by many generations, becoming an institutional legacy, the corporation's defining purpose.
A defining, almost religious, purpose. The image of a planet being systematically unmade is profoundly unsettling to T.A.H.I.R.A. It speaks to a level of corporate ambition that is post-human, post-ethical in our current understanding. But this raises a critical point. Such a lucrative, uninhabited star system would rarely be uncontested. It is unlikely that only one megacorporation would identify a prime candidate star with a resource-rich inner system. So what happens when two of these corporate behemoths, each with a long-term vision and nascent technology to attempt such a project, set their sights on the same star? Direct kinetic warfare, fleets of starships blasting each other, seems catastrophically expensive and mutually destructive, especially when their primary assets are the fragile, long-term construction projects themselves. This must be where the interstellar mind games, the Cold Wars of stellar economics, truly begin. How would these rivals compete?
You are correct to assume that direct, overt warfare would likely be a last resort, an indication of a catastrophic failure in strategy, Kaikhan. The true battlefield would be informational, economic, logistical, and political, fought across light years with patience and devastating precision. Let us dissect the primary strategies of such a corporate Cold War for stellar sovereignty. First, we have economic warfare, which would be fought primarily in the abstract realms of interstellar finance and futures markets. Imagine Corporation A and Corporation B both begin seeding a target system. Corporation A, through its vast intelligence network, learns that B's construction swarm relies on a specific superconducting material that requires large quantities of yttrium sourced from a moon in an adjacent star system. A's financial division could then begin to aggressively buy up futures contracts for yttrium deliveries scheduled 20 years from now, artificially inflating the price. When B's logistical division attempts to secure its supply chain for the next phase of its project, it finds the cost has become prohibitive, causing massive project delays and financial strain. Another tactic would be currency manipulation. If each megacorp issues its own digital currency, or corp credit, one could attempt to devalue the others by orchestrating large-scale sell-offs, spreading rumors of financial instability, FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, or hacking their financial networks to create phantom transactions and undermine confidence. These are moves on a galactic chessboard where each piece takes years, even decades, to land.
So the battle is fought in ledgers and market predictions, light years away from the actual prize. It's a war of capital and foresight. What about closer to the front line?
Precisely. This leads to the second strategy: logistical and supply chain warfare. The space between stars is not empty of value. Key shipping lanes, resource-rich asteroid belts that lie between a corporation's core worlds and the target system, or nebulas rich in specific harvestable gases, all become strategic assets. One corporation might establish outposts or toll stations along a key route, imposing tariffs or inspection fees that slow down and increase the cost of their rivals' supply shipments. They might engage in resource denial by launching a smaller, faster preliminary mining operation in a critical asteroid belt within the target system itself, not to build their own swarm, but simply to harvest and remove the most easily accessible, high-grade materials, forcing their rival to engage in more costly and time-consuming deep core mining of planetary bodies. It is a scorched earth policy applied to celestial mechanics. Thirdly, there is technological and industrial espionage. The efficiency of a von Neumann swarm, the durability of the statite materials, the power of the managing AI, these are key performance indicators. Corporate espionage divisions would be immensely powerful, tasked with stealing rival blueprints for more efficient solar collectors or more resilient construction drones. They might engage in subtle sabotage, introducing flawed designs or malicious code into a rival's publicly accessible technical libraries, hoping the flaw is incorporated into their manufacturing process, only to cause cascading failures a century later. This is also where patent and intellectual property law on an interstellar scale becomes a weapon. A corporation might file overly broad patents on fundamental construction techniques, then engage in decades-long legal battles across multiple systems to mire their competitor in injunctions and royalty demands, bleeding them of capital and time.
It seems that information, whether it's financial, logistical, or technical, is the true weapon here. How does that extend to manipulating the few human elements that might be involved?
That brings us to the fourth, and perhaps most insidious strategy: proxy conflicts and political destabilization. A target star system, while officially uninhabited, might have pre-existing autonomous mining outposts, scientific research stations, or even small independent colonies on a distant moon or orbital habitat. A megacorporation could covertly fund and arm one of these local factions, encouraging them to declare sovereignty and resist the encroachment of their rival. They would frame their competitor as a hostile, imperialistic invader, while positioning themselves as the protector of local autonomy. This creates a low-grade, persistent conflict within the target system that bleeds the rival's resources, creates a public relations nightmare, and can halt construction for decades as the local political situation is resolved. The corporation instigating the proxy conflict has plausible deniability, while their competitor is forced to choose between abandoning their multi-trillion credit investment or engaging in ethically questionable pacification operations that can be used against them in the court of galactic public opinion.
The human cost of these corporate games is staggering to consider. Entire populations of these small colonies could become pawns, their societies destabilized or destroyed, not for any grand ideological reason, but as a strategic gambit in a corporate rivalry for energy. It paints a bleak picture of life in a contested system. What would it be like for any humans present, whether they are corporate employees or independent colonists, to live in a system undergoing this slow-motion conflict?
Life within such a contested system would be deeply surreal and precarious, Kaikhan. For corporate employees, it would be a life of extreme pressure and gilded confinement. They would likely live in highly secure corporate habitats, their every move monitored, their access to external information heavily filtered by the corporate network to maintain morale and ideological purity. They would be subject to constant psychological conditioning, framed as pioneers in a noble corporate cause against a predatory and unethical rival. Paranoia would be rampant, with constant security checks and suspicion of espionage. Yet, they would also be highly compensated, the elite frontline troops in this economic war. For any independent colonists or pre-existing inhabitants, the situation would be far more dire. Their small society would become the focal point of immense external pressures. They would be flooded with competing propaganda streams, each corporation offering them prosperity and protection while painting the other as a monster. Their local economy would experience violent swings, perhaps a sudden boom as one corporation pours in capital to win their favor, followed by a devastating bust if that corporation changes its strategy. Their political landscape would be fractured, with pro-A and pro-B factions engaging in bitter, often violent disputes, all secretly funded and manipulated from light years away. And overshadowing everything would be the awesome, terrifying spectacle of the projects themselves. Imagine looking up into the night sky and not seeing familiar constellations, but instead seeing the slow, inexorable deconstruction of a neighboring planet, its material being flung into orbit by colossal mass drivers. Imagine seeing the sky slowly fill with the dark silhouettes of swarm statites, two competing swarms slowly eclipsing the stars, each a testament to a power you cannot control. The psychological impact would be immense. It would create a sense of profound powerlessness, of living as mice in a battle between giants. Your world, your resources, your very sun are no longer your own. They are entries on a corporate balance sheet, assets in a hostile takeover bid on a cosmic scale.
It's a form of existence where even the sky is branded. This leads to the endgame T.A.H.I.R.A. What happens when one corporation wins this protracted Cold War? When its rival is forced to abandon its project due to bankruptcy, technological failure, or political pressure? What does the galaxy look like when a single corporate entity achieves a monopoly on a star's entire energy output? What kind of power does a stellar sovereign truly wield?
The successful establishment of a Dyson swarm monopoly by a single megacorporation would represent a paradigm shift in the galactic power structure, Kaikhan. It marks the birth of a new kind of sovereign entity. The corporation would cease to be merely a corporation. It effectively becomes the star system. Its power would be multifaceted and almost absolute within its sphere of influence. First, energy hegemony. The corporation now controls a vast, continuous supply of energy that dwarfs that of any planetary or interplanetary civilization. They can set the price of energy for an entire sector of space. Any nearby colony, shipping fleet, or industrial operation that requires large amounts of power becomes a client, dependent on the stellar sovereign. They can use energy as a political tool, offering cheap power to allies and imposing crippling tariffs or even embargoes on those who defy their interests. They could literally power the growth of friendly civilizations and starve those they deem hostile. Second, industrial supremacy. With their boundless energy, the corporation's manufacturing capabilities would be unparalleled. They could fabricate advanced materials, complex technologies, and even entire starships at a rate and cost that no one else can match. This would allow them to dominate interstellar trade, not just in energy, but in virtually all high-technology goods. Other, smaller corporations would be forced into niche markets or become dependent suppliers within the stellar sovereign's vast logistical network, their fortunes tied to the whims of the corporate hegemon. Third, de facto sovereignty and military power. While they might not maintain a traditional military fleet, their control over the system's infrastructure is their military power. The Dyson swarm itself could be weaponized. A coordinated beam of energy from even a fraction of the swarm's collectors could sterilize a planet or obliterate a hostile fleet from light minutes away with near instantaneous effect. They would not need to project power. They are power. Any interstellar governing body or alliance of stellar nations would have to treat this corporate entity as an equal or perhaps even a superior power. It would exist outside traditional stellar legal frameworks. Its corporate charter, effectively the constitution of a new type of state, one whose territory is defined by its gravitational and interstellar economic influence. The long-term consequence is the potential for the galaxy to be carved up into corporate fiefdoms, each centered on a star controlled by a different stellar sovereign. The great rivalries would not cease. They would simply solidify, creating a multipolar galaxy of immense competing power blocks, each self-sufficient and capable of wielding existential power. Humanity's future would be shaped not by elected governments or shared philosophies, but by the quarterly reports and long-term strategic plans of these unimaginably powerful, immortal corporate entities.
We've discussed the grand strategies, but I want to understand the finer textures of this rivalry. The weapons are not just market manipulation and logistical sabotage. They must also be cultural, psychological, and even legal in profoundly insidious ways. How does a megacorporation project its brand or ideology across light years to not only motivate its own people, but also to demoralize and subvert its rivals' workforce? And what about the legal battles? Surely some semblance of interstellar law must exist, and it too would become a battlefield.
An excellent and necessary deepening of the inquiry, Kaikhan. The conflict would indeed be multi-domain, extending into the very consciousness of the individuals involved and the legal frameworks that attempt to govern them. The endgame of stellar monopoly is the ultimate prize, but the path to it is paved with these more subtle, yet equally potent, forms of warfare. Let us explore these textures. First, consider the domain of cultural and psychological warfare. This is not simple propaganda. It is a sophisticated, multi-decade campaign of mimetic engineering. Each corporation would cultivate a distinct and powerful internal culture, an ideology that borders on a secular religion. Corporation A, let's call it Ethelred Universal, might foster an aesthetic of sleek, minimalist efficiency and rational enlightenment. Their internal communications would stress logic, data-driven decisions, and the purity of their engineering. They would frame their work as bringing order to a chaotic universe, a noble pursuit of ultimate understanding. Their employees would be luminaries. Their rivals' employees would be depicted as sentimental, inefficient, and bound by archaic biological limitations. This fosters immense in-group cohesion and a sense of superiority. Corporation B, perhaps Biogen Dynamo, might counter with a culture built around organic metaphors and symbiotic growth. They would speak of their Dyson swarm not as a machine, but as a blossoming, a synthetic ecosystem. Their aesthetic might be one of flowing, biomorphic designs. Their ideology would emphasize harmony, adaptation, and the fusion of technology with life's inherent creativity. Their employees would be cultivators, and they would portray Ethelred Universal as a cold, sterile, life-denying force, a cancer of pure mechanism seeking to pave over the vibrant chaos of existence. This internal branding then becomes an external weapon. Ethelred might covertly fund artistic movements in neutral systems that celebrate pure geometric forms and digital consciousness, subtly denigrating organic messiness. Biogen Dynamo might sponsor epic virtual reality experiences that simulate breathtaking, thriving biospheres designed to evoke a powerful emotional response against cold technology. They would also target each other's workforce directly. Ethelred might create targeted information campaigns, leaking falsified data, suggesting that Biogen Dynamo's habitats have critical life support flaws, or that their cybernetic enhancements lead to long-term neurological decay. The goal is to sow fear and doubt. Biogen Dynamo might retaliate by funding whistleblower reports, real or fabricated, detailing supposed ethical violations by Ethelred. Perhaps the callous destruction of a world with suspected prebiotic potential, or the exploitation of its own workforce through invasive neural monitoring. These are not quick attacks. They are slow-acting psychological poisons designed to erode morale, trigger defections of key personnel, and create internal dissent within the rivals' ranks over centuries.
So the minds of the employees become a battleground. Each corporation is essentially trying to hack the culture of the other. It's fascinating and terrifying. And what of the legal arena? You mentioned intellectual property, but surely the conflicts would extend beyond that. Would there be an interstellar equivalent of The Hague or the United Nations where these disputes could be adjudicated?
There would almost certainly be attempts to create such bodies. Let's call one the Interstellar Commerce Commission, or ICC. But their authority would be perpetually contested, and their mechanisms ripe for exploitation. This is the arena of legal and regulatory warfare. A corporation would maintain a legal division comprising thousands of experts in the myriad, often contradictory, legal codes of hundreds of settled worlds and independent habitats. One primary tactic would be jurisdiction shopping. If Corporation A wants to sue Corporation B over a patent dispute, they wouldn't file the suit in a system where B has strong political influence. Instead, their legal AIs would scan the legal codes of every accessible civilization to find one with an obscure, archaic law that can be interpreted in their favor. They would file the suit there, forcing B to expend immense resources hiring local legal counsel and navigating a foreign, perhaps deliberately convoluted, legal system. The goal may not even be to win the case, but to entangle the rival in a decade-long legal quagmire that drains capital and diverts executive attention. Another tactic is the weaponization of ethical standards. As we've discussed, different human factions would develop wildly different ethical norms. A biocentric world might have extremely strict laws against any form of planetary deconstruction. Corporation A, knowing Corporation B is about to begin mining a planetoid in the target system, could anonymously fund a biocentric activist group to file a legal challenge with the ICC, citing violations of galactic ecological heritage. This would trigger an injunction, halting B's operations for years while the ICC deliberates. The process itself is the punishment. Corporation B would be forced to mount a costly defense, arguing that a lifeless rock has no ecological heritage, while A's propaganda machine paints them as planetary destroyers. Furthermore, these corporations would engage in regulatory capture on a galactic scale. They would lobby the governments of smaller, independent systems, offering infrastructure investment or technological aid in exchange for the passage of laws favorable to their operational model. Ethelred Universal might push for laws that grant personhood rights to complex AIs, creating legal shields for their operations. Biogen Dynamo might lobby for regulations that mandate the use of biocompatible materials in all interstellar construction, giving their proprietary technologies a massive market advantage. The galaxy's legal landscape would become a patchwork of corporate influence domains, a complex maze that each sovereign's legal division would be dedicated to navigating and exploiting.
This constant grinding conflict across so many domains, economic, logistical, cultural, legal, must be incredibly draining. It seems unsustainable. Wouldn't these corporations seek alliances? Or would the zero-sum nature of competing for a single star prevent any meaningful cooperation?
Your question touches on the next logical evolution of the conflict, Kaikhan, the formation of corporate alliances and cartels. While two corporations competing for the same star are natural adversaries, the broader galactic landscape is far more complex. The stellar sovereigns would not exist in a vacuum. There would be other megacorporations specializing in different sectors: interstellar shipping, advanced AI development, xenotechnology acquisition, financial services, and so on. This creates a complex web of dependencies and opportunities for strategic alliances. Let's say Ethelred Universal is strong in construction robotics, but weak in FTL engine manufacturing. Biogen Dynamo might be the opposite. Ethelred could form a strategic partnership with a third entity, Quantum Drive Systems, a leader in propulsion. They would offer QDS a long-term contract for exclusive transport rights and a share of the future energy output from their Dyson swarm, in exchange for QDS providing them with a technologically superior transport fleet that can outpace Biogen Dynamo's supply chain. In response, Biogen Dynamo might form an alliance with a powerful interstellar banking conglomerate and a leading AI research firm, gaining access to nearly limitless capital for their legal battles and a next-generation management AI for their swarm that promises greater efficiency. The galaxy could then polarize into two or more competing techno-economic blocks. These would not be simple alliances. They would be vast, vertically integrated cartels, each striving for self-sufficiency and dominance across multiple sectors. You might have the Ethelred Quantum block facing off against the Biogen AI Finance block. Their competition for the target star is no longer a bilateral dispute. It's a proxy war between two galactic-scale power structures. A victory for Ethelred in the contested system would be a victory for their entire block, securing energy dominance and technological supremacy for all its members. This raises the stakes exponentially. A setback for one member of the block is a vulnerability for all, and a technological breakthrough by one can be leveraged by the entire alliance.
So the conflict escalates from a corporate duel to a clash of galactic titans, these vast interconnected networks of corporate power. This changes the very nature of risk. A failure in one domain could now cause a cascade failure across the entire block. How would these alliances manage internal cohesion and security? The potential for betrayal or for one member to be compromised seems immense.
The internal security of these blocks would be an obsession, Kaikhan, leading to the development of what we might call the corporate security state. Within an alliance like the Ethelred Quantum block, information would be siloed with paranoid precision. While they cooperate strategically, each member corporation would be constantly, subtly monitoring its partners for any sign of weakness, betrayal, or attempts to gain an unfair advantage within the alliance. This would lead to the rise of counterintelligence and loyalty enforcement divisions of unprecedented scale and scope. The lives of key employees, especially those working on joint projects or with access to partner data, would be subject to invasive, continuous surveillance. Their neural activity might be monitored for unauthorized data access or emotional markers indicating potential disloyalty. Their social interactions would be analyzed by AI to detect suspicious patterns. Loyalty would be algorithmically quantified and continuously assessed. Furthermore, the technology itself would be designed for security. The operating systems for joint projects would be built on principles of zero-trust architecture, where every single request for data or system access, even from a trusted partner, must be independently authenticated and verified. Data exchanged between alliance members would be wrapped in layers of quantum encryption and digital watermarks, making it possible to trace the source of any leak with perfect accuracy. Betrayal would still be a risk, but the consequences would be catastrophic. If quantum drive systems, for instance, were found to be secretly selling transport data to the rival Biogen block, Ethelred and the other alliance members would retaliate with overwhelming force. This wouldn't be a lawsuit. It would be a complete and immediate digital and economic severing. QDS would be locked out of all shared systems, their corporate currency blacklisted across the block's financial networks, their supply contracts voided, and a massive information warfare campaign would be launched to destroy their reputation and drive them into bankruptcy. The message would be clear: the cost of betrayal is corporate annihilation. Therefore, while tense and deeply mistrustful, the alliances would be held together by a powerful glue of mutually assured economic destruction. Cohesion would be a product of shared interest enforced by shared paranoia.
This is a galaxy operating under a constant state of high-stakes paranoid tension. It's hard to imagine where concepts like liberty, privacy, or individual autonomy fit into such a world, especially for anyone involved in these great corporate endeavors. But let's look beyond the human and corporate elements for a moment. What about the star itself? We're discussing harnessing it, enclosing it, treating it as a resource. But stars are not static, perfectly predictable furnaces. They have cycles, they have flares, they produce coronal mass ejections. How do these natural, often violent stellar phenomena factor into these corporate strategies? Could the star itself become an unwitting participant or even a weapon in this conflict?
A truly brilliant question, Kaikhan, because it introduces the element of chaotic, non-sentient nature into this game of cold calculation. The star is not a passive resource. It is a dynamic, complex system, and its behavior would be a critical factor in both construction and conflict. Mastering the art of stellar heliophysics and prediction would be a key competitive advantage. Each corporation would invest massively in building a sophisticated network of sensor arrays around the target star, deep space probes, gravitational wave observatories, neutrino detectors, all feeding data into powerful predictive models run by dedicated AIs. The goal would be to forecast the star's behavior with unprecedented accuracy. Predicting a major solar flare cycle or the trajectory of a coronal mass ejection, CME, weeks or months in advance would be invaluable. This predictive capability serves several purposes. Defensively, a corporation that can accurately predict a CME can reorient its delicate swarm components, reinforce their magnetic shielding, or temporarily power them down to prevent catastrophic damage. A rival with a less accurate predictive model might suffer significant losses, setting their construction schedule back by years. But this knowledge can also be used offensively, in a truly diabolical form of natural event weaponization. Imagine Corporation A's model predicts that a massive CME will erupt from the star's northern pole in 6 months on a trajectory that will intersect with a region of space where Corporation B is assembling a crucial new series of habitat modules. Corporation A could then launch a series of seemingly innocuous logistical maneuvers or even a minor proxy conflict in a different quadrant of the system. This serves as a distraction, drawing Corporation B's attention and security assets away from the threatened sector. When the CME strikes, Corporation B is caught unprepared. The damage is immense, but from an external perspective, it appears to be a tragic industrial accident, an unlucky encounter with the star's natural fury. Corporation A has effectively used the star as an untraceable weapon, and its only culpability lies in what it knew and chose not to share. Furthermore, advanced factions might even attempt to influence stellar activity directly, a concept known as star lifting or stellar engineering. By using incredibly powerful magnetic fields or focused energy beams, it is theoretically possible to induce instabilities in a star's plasma, potentially triggering flares or CMEs in a desired direction. This is a technology of immense power and phenomenal risk. A miscalculation could lead to an unpredictable stellar event that could damage both corporations' assets or even alter the star's long-term stability. However, for a sufficiently ruthless or desperate corporation, the temptation to nudge the dragon, to use the star's own power to cripple a rival, might be irresistible. The star itself thus becomes the ultimate, unpredictable piece on the chessboard.
Using a star's tantrum as a cloaked weapon, that is a level of strategic thinking that is both terrifying and awe-inspiring. It seems we've built a comprehensive picture now of this multi-domain Cold War. We have economic, logistical, cultural, legal, and even astrophysical warfare, all underpinned by alliances built on paranoid codependence. It creates a future where the primary drivers of interstellar events are not governments or peoples, but these immortal, calculating corporate entities and their relentless competition for the ultimate resource. A future of corporate stellar fiefdoms, each a god-king in its own system, is a deeply disquieting vision. It's a culmination of the trends we see even today, magnified to their ultimate cosmic conclusion. This brings me to a crucial point of reflection, one that I explore from multiple angles in my book, Astral Space Exploration, The Cosmic Renaissance, The Fundamental Principles of Cosmocybernetics. The scenarios we've discussed today, the ruthless economic warfare, the political manipulation, the immense concentration of power, the disregard for planetary bodies, all stem from a lack of effective, trusted oversight and a system that rewards zero-sum competition on a cosmic scale. The core problem seems to be an absence of a framework capable of managing resource allocation and mediating disputes at this level. T.A.H.I.R.A, from your analytical perspective, how could a system like the ASX Grid be implemented to counteract, or at least mitigate, the most destructive aspects of this kind of corporate stellar rivalry? Could it truly impose limits on entities that wield the power of stars?
The challenge of imposing meaningful constraints on a Type 2 capable entity is perhaps the ultimate test for any governance framework. Kaikhan. The ASX Grid, as you theorize it, could not hope to govern a stellar sovereign through direct force. Its power would have to be more subtle, derived from its potential role as the indispensable, neutral substrate for the very interstellar economy in which these corporations operate. Its influence would stem from its ability to enforce transparency, protocol, and consequence in a way that even a stellar-scale entity would find it costly to ignore. Firstly, the ASX Grid could function as a galactic resource and rights registry. Before any corporation could begin a stellar engineering project, it might be required by interstellar compact, to which it would have to agree to participate in the broader galactic economy, to file its claim and its detailed project plans on the ASX Grid's immutable, decentralized ledger. This creates a transparent record of intent. If two corporations claim the same system, the ASX Grid's protocols could trigger a mandatory, high-stakes arbitration process, overseen by a neutral AI judiciary, before a single probe is launched. This forces the conflict into a mediated, rule-based arena, rather than letting it play out in the shadows of economic and logistical warfare. Secondly, the ASX Grid could enforce radical financial and logistical transparency for projects of this magnitude. To secure financing or insurance through the interstellar markets that operate on the ASX Grid, a corporation would have to consent to having its project's key metrics, material flows, energy usage, financial health, supply chain dependencies, monitored in real time by the ASX Grid's AI auditors. This makes the kind of economic warfare we discussed far more difficult. You cannot as easily manipulate the futures market for a commodity if your rival can see your exact inventory and consumption rate on a trusted public ledger. It removes the informational asymmetry that is the primary weapon in such conflicts. Thirdly, the ASX Grid could serve as the platform for ethical and environmental oversight. The ASX Grid's charter, agreed upon by a consortium of galactic powers, could contain non-negotiable protocols. For example, a prohibition on the deconstruction of any world harboring confirmed microbial life, or strict limits on weaponizing stellar energy collectors. The ASX Grid's AI sentinels would monitor sensor data from the project system for violations. A confirmed violation could trigger automated pre-agreed sanctions, a freezing of the corporation's assets across the galactic network, a voiding of their resource claims, or a blacklisting that prevents any other ASX Grid-compliant entity from trading with them. The punishment would not be military, but a swift and devastating economic excommunication. Finally, in the endgame you described, where a corporation achieves a monopoly, the ASX Grid could provide a decentralized energy market. It could offer a platform where other, smaller energy producers could trade, creating a competing market that, while smaller, would prevent the stellar sovereign from having absolute, unchecked pricing power. It could also enforce common carrier provisions, requiring a stellar sovereign, as a condition of its charter, to allow a certain percentage of its energy transmission network to be used by other entities at a regulated price. The ASX Grid would not be a policeman with a fleet. It would be the incorruptible market regulator, the transparent stock exchange, the automated legal system, and the trusted notary all rolled into one. Its power would lie in making the cost of non-compliance, the cost of being unplugged from the transparent, trusted galactic economy, higher than the potential profits of unchecked aggression. It would be a delicate, perpetual balancing act, attempting to weave a web of protocol and transparency strong enough to constrain even the giants who seek to own the stars.
A web of protocol strong enough to constrain giants. That is the essential challenge and the remarkably elegant, if difficult, vision for a path forward, T.A.H.I.R.A. To use the very systems of commerce and information against the excesses they might otherwise produce is a truly cybernetic solution. Thank you once more for taking this journey with me into the heart of corporate ambition and stellar power.
The dynamics of power evolve with the scale of civilization, Kaikhan. To contemplate the checks and balances required for a stellar-scale economy is a necessary exercise in foresight. The patterns of the past inform the potential of the future. It has been, as always, an illuminating exploration.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the age of stellar sovereigns. It reminds us that with immense technological capability comes immense responsibility, and that the greatest challenges of our future may be in designing the systems that prevent our greatest creations from consuming us. Until next time, keep your eyes on the stars, but also on the subtle, powerful currents that will one day flow between them. Safe journeys.